There is a particular kind of silence that happens at weddings, the pause right before two people say I do, when even the air seems to hold its breath. I was sitting in the third row, in a suit I'd bought specifically for that day, holding a champagne glass I hadn't touched, when Daniel's mother turned around and looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has been sitting at your family's table for years without you noticing. She wasn't looking at a coworker's +1 anymore. She was looking at the man her son loved. I didn't know, in that moment, whether the story I'd spent 2 years protecting was about to end, or whether it was finally, terrifyingly, about to begin. Before any of that, there was just an office on the 14th floor, gray carpet, the smell of burnt coffee, and a man named Daniel Reyes who sat 2 desks away from mine and never once, in 8 months, said more than morning to me. My name is Theo Okafor. I was 31, newly transferred to the Chicago branch of a mid-sized architecture firm, still learning which doors stuck and which elevator skipped the 9th floor. I noticed Daniel the way you notice a locked door, not because you want to go through it, but because it's the only one in the hallway that doesn't open easily. He was 42, recently divorced, father to a 17-year-old daughter named Priya, and carried himself like a man who had already used up his ration of surprises for one lifetime. He wore the same 3 gray sweaters in rotation. He ate lunch alone, reading blueprints instead of his phone. When people laughed too loudly near his desk, he didn't flinch, but something in his shoulders folded inward, like he was making himself smaller so the noise would have less of him to touch. I told myself I was only curious. Architects are trained to notice structure, what holds weight, what's load-bearing, what will crack under pressure if you don't reinforce it in time. Daniel looked, to me, like a building someone had stopped maintaining. It was a Tuesday in October when the Real conversation happened. A pipe had burst in the break room, and everyone had scattered except the 2 of us, mopping up water with paper towels because neither of us wanted to admit defeat first. You don't have to do this, he said, not looking up. Neither do you. He almost smiled. Almost. Fair. We worked in silence for a while, and then, out of nowhere, he asked, why'd you transfer here? Everyone transfers out of Chicago in October. Ex-boyfriend, I said, because it was true, and because something about the wet floor and the stupid absurdity of 2 grown men on their knees with paper towels made honesty feel safe. Needed distance. You. His hands stopped moving. Ex-wife, he said. Needed to stay, for my daughter. Guess we solved the same problem in opposite directions. That was the first time Daniel Reyes looked at me like I was a person and not furniture. I didn't know yet that it would take another year before either of us admitted what that look meant. Friendship crept in sideways, the way it does when neither person is looking for it. We started eating lunch together, not because we planned to, but because his usual table was taken one day and mine had an open chair. Daniel talked about Priya constantly, in the specific, aching way of a father who is trying to make up for a marriage that ended before he thought it would. He showed me a photo of her at her junior prom, her arms slung around a friend, laughing at something outside the frame. She's furious at me, he admitted one day, stirring coffee he wasn't drinking. Thinks the divorce was my fault. Maybe it was. I worked too much. I wasn't present. You ever do that? Build something so carefully you forget to live in it? I thought about the buildings we designed for a living, all steel bones and glass skin, engineered to hold weight but never designed to feel anything. All the time, I said. He looked at me for a second too long. I don't usually talk this much. I don't usually listen this well, I said, and he laughed, really laughed, for the first time since I'd met him, and something in my chest rearranged itself without my permission. We began staying late together, ostensibly to finish project drawings, though the drawings got finished faster and faster while the conversation stretched longer and longer. He told me about growing up the son of a strict Filipino father who never once said I love you but built Daniel a treehouse with his bare hands the summer he turned 9. I told him about my mother in Lagos, who prayed for me nightly and had never quite forgiven me for moving to a country that let me be who I was but took me farther from her. We didn't talk about attraction. We didn't have to. It lived in the pauses, in the extra second before he looked away, in the way I started remembering how he took his coffee without ever being told twice. One night in late November, working past 10, he leaned back in his chair and said, quietly, like he was testing the weight of the words before releasing them, "You're the first person in this building who's made this year bearable." I didn't answer with words. I just let the silence hold what we weren't yet brave enough to say. For a long time, we told ourselves it was friendship. That the electricity when our hands brushed passing blueprints was static. That the way I noticed when he was having a bad day, before he said a word, was just being observant. But on the night of the office holiday party, everything shifted an inch closer to honest. We ended up on the rooftop, away from the noise, 2 plastic cups of cheap wine between us and the whole skyline lit up like a circuit board. Daniel was quiet in the particular way that meant he was thinking too hard. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "And you don't have to answer. Go ahead. Do you think it's possible to be 42 and just figuring yourself out? Like actually figuring it out. Not a crisis. Just late." My heart moved somewhere it shouldn't have. "I think most people never figure themselves out at all," I said carefully. "So late is better than never." He nodded slowly, staring at the city instead of me. "There's a version of my life I didn't let myself imagine," he said. "Not because I didn't want it. Because I didn't think I was allowed. I didn't push." I understood, better than he knew, what it cost a man raised the way he was raised to say even that much out loud. "You're allowed now," I said quietly. He turned to look at me, and for one unbearable, electric second, I thought he might close the distance between us. Instead, he exhaled, laughed under his breath at himself, and said, "Priya's graduation is in June. You should come. As my friend. If you want." It wasn't a confession. But it was a door left open a crack, and I understood exactly what he was offering, and exactly what he wasn't ready to say yet. "I'd like that," I said. Neither of us moved closer that night. But something had been named, even without words, and it couldn't be unnamed again. Priya noticed before either of us admitted it to ourselves. I came to her graduation in June, standing at the edge of a crowd of proud parents, clapping when her name was called, and afterward, when Daniel introduced me as my friend from work, Priya studied me with the sharp, unfolded eyes of a teenager who has learned to read adults for a living. Later, while Daniel went to find the car, she turned to me at the edge of the parking lot and said, without preamble, "You like my dad." I nearly dropped my coffee. "Priya." "It's fine," she said, arms crossed, but not unkindly. "I'm not mad. I want to know if you're going to be careful with him. He acts like nothing bothers him, but it all bothers him. He just doesn't say it." I didn't know what to say to a 17-year-old who had somehow already understood her father better than he understood himself. "I care about him," I said honestly. "Whatever that turns into, I'd never hurt him on purpose." She studied me a moment longer, then nodded, like she'd filed the information away for later use. "Okay," she said. "Just, don't wait too long. He waits too long for everything. It's kind of his whole thing." She walked off toward her friends before I could respond, leaving me standing there with the uncomfortable, thrilling knowledge that the daughter had seen the truth before the father had let himself feel it. It happened on an ordinary Thursday in August, the kind of night that gives no warning it's about to become a turning point. Daniel had invited me over to help hang shelves in his new apartment, the one he'd moved into after the divorce, still half unpacked, boxes labeled in Priya's handwriting. We worked for an hour, drilled crooked holes, laughed at our own incompetence, and when the shelf finally held, we stood back to admire it like we'd built a cathedral. "To structural integrity," he said, raising a beer. "To not falling apart," I answered, and something about the words landed differently than I meant them to. He set his beer down. The apartment went quiet in that specific, charged way rooms go quiet right before truth arrives. "Theo," he said. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything back." I nodded. "I've spent my whole life building things I thought I was supposed to want. A career. A marriage. A version of myself my father would recognize. And somewhere in all that building, I forgot to ask what I actually wanted." He exhaled, hands trembling slightly. "I know what I want now. I've known for months. I was just too scared to be the man who finally says it." "Daniel. Let me finish," he said, softer now. "I'm scared of my family. I'm scared of what this changes. I'm scared of getting it wrong at 42 when everyone else figured it out at 20. But I'm more scared of another year of almost. So, I like you, Theo. Not as a friend. I have for a long time. And I don't expect you to." I closed the distance he'd been too afraid to close on the rooftop months before, and kissed him before he could talk himself out of his own honesty. When we finally pulled back, he laughed, stunned, relieved, undone. That's a better answer than I expected." "You waited long enough," I said, echoing his daughter's words without knowing it. "I wasn't about to let you wait longer." For the next year, our relationship existed in a careful, guarded space, real to us, invisible to almost everyone else. Daniel wasn't ready to tell his mother, a devout woman who still asked weekly when he'd remarry a nice girl. He wasn't ready to face the version of his father's memory that lived in his head, judging him for a life his father never got the chance to understand. I didn't push. I'd learned, in my own life, that coming out isn't a single door, it's 100 small doors, and every person opens them in their own time, at their own cost. We built a life in the in-between spaces. Quiet dinners at my apartment. Weekend trips 2 hours outside the city, where no one knew either of our names. Priya, who'd known from the start, became our fiercest, funniest ally, showing up with takeout, rolling her eyes affectionately when we were being disgustingly cute, covering for us without ever being asked. "You know you can't hide forever, right?" she said to her father one night, only half joking. "I'm getting married someday. You're gonna have to bring a date." Daniel had laughed it off then. Neither of us knew how soon that joke would become real. The trouble was, love that's kept in careful boxes has a way of outgrowing them. And Daniel's family, specifically his formidable, sharp-eyed mother, Corazon, had a way of noticing exactly the things you tried hardest to hide. Priya got engaged the spring she turned 21, to a kind, steady young man named Marcus she'd met in college. Daniel cried when she told him, quiet, overwhelmed tears he tried and failed to hide. "My little girl," he kept saying. "My little girl is getting married." The wedding was set for late September, at a lakeside venue 2 hours from the city, and Priya, without asking her father's permission, sent me my own invitation, not as Daniel's +1, but addressed directly, Theo Okafor. "I'm not doing the fake friend thing at my own wedding," she told her father flatly, when he asked, panicked, what she'd done. "You've been together 2 years. I love him. Half the family probably already knows. I'm done pretending for people who should just be happy for you." Daniel came to me that night, shaken. "She invited you. By name. My mother's going to be there. My aunts. Everyone who still asks me why I haven't moved on properly. Do you want me to say I can't come?" I asked, even though the offer cost me more than I let on. He was quiet for a long moment, turning the invitation over in his hands like it might answer for him. "No," he finally said. "I'm tired of choosing fear. I want you there. He stopped, took a breath, tried again. "As the man I love. Whatever that costs." It was the first time he'd said those exact words. I held on to them harder than I let him see. But fear doesn't disappear just because you've decided to be brave. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel came to me pale and distracted, having just gotten off the phone with his mother. "She wants to sit next to me at the reception," he said. "She wants to know why I'm bringing a work friend to a family event. She's already suspicious, Theo, and he pressed his palms into his eyes. I don't know if I can do this in front of her. In front of everyone. I thought I was ready and I'm not, and I hate that I'm not. The fear in his voice cracked something open in me, not anger, but a tired, aching sadness. I'm not asking you to announce anything, I said carefully. But I need to know if I'm coming as your partner, or as a placeholder you can explain away. Because I can't keep being the second version, Daniel. Not anymore. I love you too much to keep shrinking for people who haven't even met me yet. It was the first real fight we'd had, not loud, but heavy, full of 2 years of unspoken weight finally spilling out. He accused me of not understanding what it meant to disappoint a mother who'd sacrificed everything for him. I accused him of using his mother as a reason to keep me in the shadows longer than was fair. We didn't speak for 4 days. On the 5th day, he showed up at my apartment, exhausted, holding 2 coffees, one made exactly the way I liked it. I talked to Priya, he said before I could speak. She told me something I needed to hear. She said I taught her that love means showing up honestly, even when it's terrifying, and that if I don't believe that for myself, I never really taught her anything at all. He set the coffee down and looked at me, steadier than I'd seen him in months. I don't want to hide anymore, Theo. Not because it's easy. Because you're not a secret I'm ashamed of. You're the truest thing I've built in years. I forgave him before he finished the sentence. The lake was silver under a September sky the day Priya got married, string lights already glowing faintly against the fading afternoon light. I sat in the 3rd row, in a suit I'd bought specifically for that day, watching Daniel walk his daughter down the aisle with a pride so open on his face it made my throat ache. At the reception, he didn't seat me at a distant table. He pulled a chair beside his own, in full view of his mother, his aunts, cousins who hadn't seen him in years. Corazon Reyes watched the whole thing with narrowed, careful eyes, the way she'd been watching all day. When the toasts ended and the music began, she made her way over, and I felt Daniel's hand tighten briefly around mine under the table before he let it go and stood to meet her. "Ma," he said. "This is Theo." "I know who he is," she said, not unkindly, studying me with an intensity that made my pulse jump. "I've known for months, Daniel. I'm your mother. You think I don't notice when my son smiles at his phone like that?" Daniel went very still. "Ma, I'm not here to make a scene at your daughter's wedding," she said, cutting him off, her voice softening in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm old-fashioned. I won't pretend I understand everything about your life now. But I watched you today, walking Priya down that aisle, and I haven't seen you look that whole in years." Her eyes shifted to me, sharp but not unkind. "Whatever you are to my son, you make him look like that. That matters more to me than what I understand or don't." It wasn't a full embrace. It wasn't perfect acceptance wrapped in a bow. But it was honest, and given where we'd started, honest was more than either of us had dared to hope for. Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 2 years, and when he looked at me, there were tears in his eyes he didn't bother hiding. "I told you," Priya said later, finding us near the edge of the dance floor, radiant in white, teasing even on her own wedding day. "Don't wait too long. Look how well that turned out." Later that night, after the last guests had gone and the string lights had dimmed to embers, Daniel and I walked along the edge of the lake, his jacket around my shoulders, the water black and quiet beside us. 2 years ago I couldn't say your name to my own reflection," he said. "Tonight my mother said it to your face." "Discovery isn't always the disaster we're afraid of," I said. "Sometimes it's just the truth finally getting room to breathe." He stopped walking and turned to face me fully, the way he had that night on the rooftop, except this time there was nothing left unsaid between us. "I built my whole life being careful," he said. "Careful marriage, careful career, careful silence. You're the first reckless thing I've ever let myself want. And I'm not careful about you, Theo. I don't want to be." "Good," I said. "Because I stopped being careful about you a long time ago." He kissed me there, by the water, in full view of anyone who might still be watching, not hidden, not hurried, not afraid. The title of our story had always felt like a warning, then his family discovered our secret. But standing there, watching the moonlight scatter across the lake, I understood it had never really been a secret worth protecting. It had been a truth worth waiting for, and finally, at long last, a truth we no longer had to hide.